Hey everybody, Marlene here. Home canning has been a part of my life since I was a newlywed. That was back in the early 1970s. David and I got married in 1973. At that time, David put in a large garden. He planted a very large garden in our backyard of our shotgun house. And if you don't know what a shotgun house is, these are houses that are built in Louisiana that the main purpose is for airflow to go through the house. So prior to air conditioning, these houses were built so people could have decent airflow and have some cooling air in the summertime to come through their house. It's very humid down there. And so these were shotgun houses built for that purpose. So you could have an attic fan that would pull in air and cool the house this way. So the shotgun house that we lived in when we were newlyweds, you would walk in, you would have a living room, then a bedroom, then we had the kitchen, then the bath, and another bedroom. So that's how our shotgun house was. I had lived in shotgun houses when I was a kid. The floor plan was a little bit different. My aunt's floor plan was a little bit different too. Some of them have a porch on the back with the laundry, washer and dryer, and then you go out the back there and then hang up your clothes. So that was kind of how it was when I was growing up. So my mother had the laundry in the back, and then she would go out backyard and hang up the clothes. So anyway, I'm getting off the topic a little bit here, but I wanted to explain shotgun houses in case some of you out there didn't know what a shotgun house was. Back to the topic of this garden that David planted in our backyard. It really did fill our small backyard at the time. And what I remember most about that were the corn stalks, because we had never, well, this was our first garden actually as a married couple. And neither of us had ever planted corn. As kids, would plant beans and things like that. And I used to enjoy planting sweet peas on the fence. And my dad would plant some vegetables sometimes. But corn was not anything that I had ever really seen growing. So that was pretty amazing to me that we had actually planted and grown corn in our backyard. And so the idea of this whole garden was to be self-sufficient. David has always had this dream of being self-sufficient. So this was the beginning of that idea, that the first thing you would do would be to plant yourself a garden so you could be more self-sustaining with food that you planted and preserve yourself. So that was the goal. That was the idea. And David even said, well, what we don't have, we can go to the French market and buy vegetables, and we can can them and save save money on food. We would have our own stores of food, and that would help us to stay within a newlywed's budget. I remember at the time David even suggested that I could make my own peanut butter, and at the time I was 18 with a new baby, and I really didn't find that all that thrilling to think that I was going to make my own peanut butter. Now, in retrospect, I wish I would have done that. My views on that have changed over the years, and I've made lots of things over time that I didn't think that I was going to do as a young woman. Okay. I was young and naive, and I wish I would have made peanut butter at that time, but I didn't. That's kind of where I drew the line. Okay. We can do some preserving, we can do some canning, but I don't think I'm going to make my own peanut butter. The gardening and the canning experience turned out to be very productive. The garden produced food, and David made some really delicious vegetable soup. I think that's one of the few times he ever cooked, really. He hardly ever cooks, but he was into cooking vegetable soup for a while there. And that's one of the things that he preserved. He cooked some vegetable soup and put it into quart jars, and we canned it with our 12-quart Harvest Gold Presto pressure canner. And in fact, I still have that pressure canner that I use today. So it's still around. I didn't get rid of it. I did replace the gasket on it when I started using it again. So after that experience there, I really didn't do much canning after that. That was something that we had done temporarily, and life moved on, life went on, got busy with the kids and all of that sort of thing. And it wasn't until we moved into the suburbs that I pulled out that canner again and decided to do some canning. And I remember I canned blackberry jam with berries that we had picked as a family in the spillway of Louisiana. And then I also made mock strawberry jam with the figs from my neighbor's trees. So she had said, hey, we've got some figs if you want to pick some figs. So I went over and picked some figs in her yard. And, just as an aside, when she and her husband sold that house, another man moved in and he cut down all of the fruit trees in the backyard. And to me, that was just unthinkable that somebody could move in and actually cut down the fig trees and whatever other fruit trees that he had. But that's another story. At any rate, I had gone in and taken advantage of this opportunity. She said, come and pick some figs. So I went on over, picked enough figs to make some mock strawberry jam. I don't know if you guys have ever had mock strawberry jam. It tastes just like strawberries. And I do love figs, but the way you make the mock strawberry jam, I believe it was with Jello pudding, if I'm not pudding, Jello, just the strawberry Jello, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so that was my canning experience at that point, at that stage. We had done some canning as newlyweds. Then we move into the 80s, where I did some canning there, not very much, but I had done some canning there. So fast forward into the 2000s when we moved to Montana. And it wasn't until we moved to Montana in the 2000s that I pulled out that 35-year-old canner and decided that I was going to do some canning again. At the time, we had apple trees in the yard. We had picked huckleberries, and we had also done some U-pick flathead cherries. And so that made it worthwhile to can, because canning can be a big chore. So if you don't have enough produce to can, it's really not worthwhile. So between the harvesting of the apples and the huckleberries and then the cherries, this is what motivated me to pull that canner out and decide that I was going to do some more canning. I replaced the gasket on the old canner and the vent plug. And I pulled out my old ball canning book for recipes. And by the time fall rolled around and it was harvest time for the apples, and we had this other produce to can, I was ready to go. I checked my jars and I said to myself, oh, I'm not going to have enough jars for this. I'm going to have to buy some more jars. So I had to buy some more jars to do the canning. I started looking around town to buy jars. And I really didn't realize how popular canning was here in Montana. Or maybe it's popular everywhere. It's just that I hadn't canned for such a long time. I didn't know that it was such a popular activity that people did, or a popular way for people to preserve their food. So I was kind of out of touch with that. So it was really nice to see that people were actually doing that, because at the time I thought it was a lost art. I thought it was something that, people in my generation didn't really do. So anyway, I'm going around looking for canning jars, from to hardware stores, grocery stores, wherever jars were sold, to get these canning jars so I could preserve these apples and huckleberries and cherries. And one of the recipes required clear gel. Now, clear gel is just a thickening agent, and I was looking for that as well. I'm like, where can I find clear gel? So I started looking online and I found out that clear gel is something that is used commercially. So I got the bright idea. I will go to the grocery stores, and see if I can find out in their bakery department if they use clear gel. Well, I went to Rosar's and I asked the baker there, do you have any clear gel? You know, I need it for canning. I'm making I'm making a recipe that requires clear gel. I need like a 3/4 cup of clear gel, but I'm willing to buy a pound of it if you, can sell it to me. So this guy was really nice. He said, yeah, sure, I can sell you some clear gel. So he sold me a pound of clear gel. And I'll be frank with you, I think I still have some of that clear gel in a jar someplace. I didn't ever use it again because there are other other products that you can buy besides the clear gel. I'm trying to think of what it's called now, but it comes in a box that you buy for jams, and it's real easy to find. So I don't know why I was looking at a recipe that had what's called clear gel that was actually the commercial product instead of a consumer product. But anyway, I got the clear gel, and so I was, ready to do all of that canning. But I did have to prepare myself mentally, because canning is something that one really does need to prepare themselves for mentally, because sometimes it's days on end that you're going to be cleaning and sorting and picking and preparing, whether it's fruits or vegetables, for the canning process. So I did prepare myself mentally for that. Oh, I just remembered what it is. It's called fruit pectin. So that's what they sell in the little small boxes. It's a fruit pectin. So you don't really need to go hunting down clear gel. But the baker and I felt really good about that transaction that I had at Rosar's. And so now I was ready to can. And I was using Ball's website for a lot of these recipes. So I decided to take a look at the history of canning and the history of jars. A lot of times I find it interesting to discover, what's behind all of this. How did this get started? I think most of us are familiar with the three names that come to mind when it comes to home canning. And, we have Ball, Kerr, and Mason. So, you have Ball jars, Kerr jars, and Mason jars. And Mason jars, I think so many people are familiar with that name. So Ball's website made it really easy with a little timeline that gave me the company's history of how all of this started. According to this historical timeline on the website, prior to the 1830s, preserving was done seasonally. And in fact, I think I would say it still is done seasonally for the most part. And people would preserve by pickling, drying, or smoking. And if they did use jars, they used a wax sealer. Okay, they sealed the jars with wax, which oftentimes was ineffective and allowed bacteria to get in and to grow. Now we fast forward to 1858, when a tinsmith named John L. Mason invented the mason jar. And it was a square shouldered jar with threaded screw top. It had a lid and that rubber ring, which made that airtight seal. And that is really what revolutionized home canning. Because prior to that, like I said, they were sealing with wax, which would be ineffective in many cases, and it would allow bacteria to get into those jars, and food would be spoiled. And one of the things, we want to concern ourselves with when we're canning is to make sure that everything is properly sealed, so we're not getting any bacteria in there and growing mold and botulism and all that kind of thing. That's a little brief history of mason jars. Now, the Ball Brothers Glass Manufacturing Company entered the picture in 1880, and they began producing fruit jars in 1884. The Kerr Company introduced its brand in 1901 in Portland, Oregon. Perhaps that's why Oregon is one of the biggest states in canning to this day, along with Utah, Idaho, and Montana. So that's all of that. I found that out. So that was really an eye opener for me because, I was now living in Montana and it is big on canning. Ball's fruit pectin was introduced in 1988, and then 14 years later, the no-cook freezer jam pectin hit the shelves. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. And then in 2005, Ball started marketing the plastic freezer jars. It's an easy way to preserve homemade jams. And I have used those as well because those are really simple. You don't have to do any water bath processing, and you can just whip up a recipe in your pot and pour it into these plastic jars and stick them in the freezer, and you've got homemade jam. Really delicious. If you do have time constraints, it is a way to preserve things. And like I said, it's really nice to have some homemade jam. So if you're not really into preserving any other way and you want to use those plastic freezer containers, yeah, it's a great way to take advantage of an abundance of produce that you may get from the grocery store. If they put strawberries on sale, for example, or blueberries on sale, and you want to make some jam, they are a great way to do that. Back to a little bit more of the history here. John L. Mason's patent expired in 1879, and that opened up the market to competition. And Ball quit the home canning business in 1993. And a subsidiary to the Ball Company is called Altrista. They took over the canning end of the business. And they later acquired the Kerr brand in 1996. And in 2005, Altrista changed their name to Jarden Home Brands, and that includes Ball and Kerr. So that's just a little bit of a history of how all of the canning jars came into being. And for me, home canning is a lot of work. It means a lot of mess. And because there's a lot of washing and sterilizing of supplies, as well as preparing the large quantities of produce. You might want to know, well, why do you do it? Why do you do it if you think it's so much trouble? And the simplest answer is I like to take advantage of the abundant crops and enjoy wholesome foods throughout the year, because that is what canning allows me to do. I do enjoy vegetable gardening. You can probably check out one of my other videos. I'll put a link on this video, a link in the description to one of my gardening videos if you want to take a look at that. And I like the idea of being more self-sufficient. I like the idea that it helps out with a budget and that we can be a little bit more self-sufficient. And the preserves are really, really tasty, and I do get pleasure out of the fruits of our labor. I really like sharing the fruits of our labor with people, and it's really nice to open up a jar in the middle of winter and know that this is something fresh that you preserve. And I really like the idea that I taught my kids how to do this, and they are a little bit more self-sufficient. And you know what? Those canning jars are just absolutely beautiful. If nothing else, I really love looking at the jars with all of the beautifully colored vegetables and fruits inside those jars. That's one of life's simple pleasures for me. So there's also, the satisfaction of a job well done. So let me know in the comments if you do any canning, if you do any food preservation and how that helps out with your budget. Please like and share this video and leave your comments below and subscribe to the channel for more outside the box retirement ideas. Until next time, stay curious, stay healthy, and trust your retirement journey. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you're all well. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Marlene with Rebel Retirement, and I'll see you next time.